I planned my own anniversary party. I picked the venue, I chose the flowers, I wrote out the guest list by hand. And on that list, without knowing it, I wrote down the name of the woman my husband had been sleeping with for 11 months. I'm going to tell you exactly how I found out and exactly what I did about it, because by the end of this, you're going to understand why some revenge doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be perfectly timed. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I'd been married for 7 years, and for the last year of it, I thought I was the luckiest woman I knew. My husband, I'll call him Mark, had started reconnecting with old friends from his college days. One of those friends was a woman named Danielle. She'd just moved back to the city, he said. Getting divorced, he said. Needed people around her, he said. Looking back, I can see now how carefully constructed that story was. It had just enough sadness in it to explain why he needed to see her often, and just enough vulnerability in her situation to make me feel almost obligated to be kind. I remember the first time he mentioned her name over dinner, how casually he brought it up, testing the water, watching for my reaction the way you'd check if a stove burner was still hot. I felt for her. I invited her to dinner. She showed up with a bottle of wine and an easy laugh, the kind of woman who fills silences comfortably, who asks good follow-up questions, who makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. I understood immediately why Mark had reconnected with her. I did not understand, not yet, what that reconnection actually meant. I invited her to my birthday. She brought a gift that was thoughtful in a way that suggested she'd actually paid attention to things I'd mentioned in passing. A candle in a scent I'd once said I liked. A book by an author I'd mentioned reading. At the time, I took it as evidence of a genuinely caring, new friend. Now I understand it differently. She'd been paying attention because Mark had been talking about me to her, feeding her details, the way you brief someone before they meet people who matter to your other life. And when I started planning our 7th anniversary party, I invited her to that too, because by then, she felt like a friend. She'd become part of our regular rotation, someone who showed up to group dinners, who texted me directly sometimes about unrelated things, recipe recommendations, a show she thought I'd like. I had absolutely no reason to suspect her. That was the whole design of it. Here's what I didn't know. Mark's assistant at work, a quiet, sharp young woman named Priya, had been watching this unfold for months. She saw the calendar invites, blocked off as client strategy session, on days when I later learned there were no clients scheduled at all. She saw the late client dinners that were never on any client list she managed. She saw the hotel confirmation email that accidentally printed on the shared office printer instead of Mark's personal one, because he'd been careless exactly once. Distracted during a busy morning, hitting the wrong printer default from a shared network folder. Priya told me later that her stomach dropped the moment she picked that page up off the printer tray. She said she stood there for a full minute, just staring at it. At both their names on the confirmation, at the date that lined up, exactly with a week, Mark had told the office he'd be traveling for a conference that, as far as she could tell from his actual calendar, didn't exist. She didn't say anything to me, not at first. She barely knew me beyond a handful of office holiday parties and the occasional coffee I'd brought by when I stopped in to see Mark at work. But something in her kept that printed confirmation instead of shredding it like she probably should have. She told me she almost deleted the digital folder she eventually built a dozen times over the following months, told herself repeatedly that it wasn't her business, that getting involved in her boss's marriage was exactly the kind of career-ending mistake young employees are warned about. But something about how kind I'd been to her, small things, remembering her name at parties, asking real questions about her life instead of the polite, nothing questions most executives' spouses ask assistants, made her keep the folder, just in case. Over the following months, that folder grew. Screenshots of messages she happened to see open on his shared work laptop during legitimate work tasks. Calendar entries that didn't match his actual whereabouts, which she sometimes had to track for scheduling purposes anyway. A pattern, documented carefully, dated, organized, sitting quietly on a personal drive she kept separate from anything work-related. The anniversary party was set for a Saturday evening at a small venue downtown, the kind of place with string lights strung across a stone patio and a view that looks beautiful in every photo regardless of the time of day. I spent 3 weeks planning it, the kind of planning that becomes almost meditative when you love someone and want to celebrate them properly. I ordered a cake with both our names on it in delicate script. I wrote a toast, revising it 4 separate times until it felt exactly right. I meant every word of that toast when I practiced it in the mirror the night before, reading it out loud to an empty bathroom, which should tell you how thoroughly convincing he'd been. 2 days before the party, Priya called me. Not emailed, not texted, called on a Thursday night around 8, her voice shaking in a way that made me answer immediately, assuming something had happened at the office, some emergency involving Mark that I needed to know about. In a way, I suppose that's exactly what it was. She said she had something I needed to see, and she was sorry, so genuinely sorry, and she should have told me months earlier, and she hoped more than anything that I wouldn't hate her for waiting this long. She sent me the folder that same night. I sat on my bathroom floor for 2 hours looking at screenshots of messages between my husband and a woman I had personally invited to my own anniversary party. A woman I'd bought a birthday gift for, just months earlier. Messages from a hotel 40 minutes outside the city, dated 3 weeks earlier. The same week Mark told me he was at a work conference in another state, a conference I'd even helped him pack for, ironing his shirts, reminding him to bring his charger. I want to tell you my first instinct was rage. It wasn't. My first instinct was math. I did the math on 11 months, on every dinner I'd cooked for the two of them together at my own table, on every time I'd asked Danielle how her divorce was progressing, and she'd looked me directly in the eye, without flinching, and lied to my face with practiced ease. Then the rage came, eventually, sometime around midnight, sitting alone in a dark bathroom while my husband slept peacefully in the next room. But I didn't scream. I didn't confront him that night, even though every instinct in my body wanted to. I closed the folder, splashed cold water on my face, and went to bed next to a man I now knew was a stranger, and I let him sleep soundly beside the woman he was betraying, because I had 2 days left before the party, and I was going to use every single hour of them. The next morning, I called the venue coordinator and made exactly one change to the seating chart. I moved Danielle from a table near the back, where she'd originally been placed among more casual acquaintances, to the head table seated directly across from Priya, who I had also quietly added to the guest list, using Mark's own credit card that he'd left linked to the event account for exactly this kind of last-minute adjustment. Then, I called my sister, who is a paralegal specializing in family law, and asked her a very specific question about how community property law treats documented infidelity in our state during a divorce settlement, particularly when there's clear evidence of financial commingling during the affair, hotel bills, gifts, meals charged to shared accounts. The answer was useful, very useful, and it gave me a level of calm clarity I hadn't expected to find in the middle of what should have been the worst week of my marriage. I did not confront Mark, not once, over those 2 days. I smiled at him across the kitchen table. I let him help me set up chair covers on Friday afternoon, standing beside him in the venue, discussing where the DJ should set up, nodding along as he made small talk with the caterer about appetizer choices. I let him rehearse his own anniversary toast in front of me on Friday night, a toast about loyalty, about how lucky he was that I'd stood by him through everything, which was an oddly specific thing to say to a woman he genuinely did not believe knew anything at all. Saturday night came. The string lights were beautiful, exactly as I'd imagined them when I first walked through the venue 3 weeks earlier. The cake was beautiful, our names in that delicate script catching the evening light. Danielle arrived in a dress that probably cost more than my wedding shoes, hugging me warmly at the door, telling me the venue looked absolutely incredible, and I thanked her, and I meant it, because it was about to become the most memorable venue of her life for reasons she did not yet expect. Dinner went smoothly enough. Wine was poured generously. Conversation flowed the way it does at parties where everyone assumes they know exactly what kind of evening they're attending. Mark stood up to give his toast around 9 o'clock, the one about loyalty, and I let him get through the first 2 lines, watching him build momentum, watching Danielle smile softly across the table, words she probably assumed were only about the marriage she was actively helping to destroy, before I stood up next to him, took the microphone gently from his hand, and said I had something to add. I didn't yell. I want to be very clear about that, because yelling would have made me look unstable, unreliable, easy to dismiss as an emotional woman having an episode. I needed to look like exactly what I was, a woman who had done her homework, calm and precise. I thanked everyone for coming to celebrate 7 years of marriage, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I said that in a marriage, you learn things about your partner you never expected to learn, some wonderful, some devastating. And then I looked directly at Danielle, holding her gaze for a beat longer than comfortable, and said I was so glad she'd finally moved back to the city, because it meant she could be here in person for what I had planned as a surprise for Mark. I nodded to the projector screen behind us, the one that was supposed to show our wedding photos on a gentle slideshow loop throughout the reception. Priya had swapped the files that morning, at my request, using access she still technically had to the shared event account from helping coordinate logistics earlier in the planning process. Instead of our wedding photos, the screen filled with the hotel confirmation, both their names printed clearly across the top, the date circled in red, followed by 3 separate message screenshots, time-stamped, unmistakable. The room went silent in that specific way. A room goes silent when 40 people simultaneously realize they are witnessing something they will talk about for years, the kind of silence that has weight to it, that presses against your ears. Danielle stood up so fast she knocked over her wine glass, the red spreading across the white tablecloth in a way that felt almost symbolic. Mark grabbed for the projector remote like he could somehow undo what 40 people had already seen, fumbling with buttons that wouldn't have changed anything even if he'd found the right one in time. I did not move. I stood there in my anniversary dress, holding a microphone, and I let the silence do what silence does best, let it stretch out until every single person in that room had fully absorbed what was on the screen. Then, I set the microphone down gently on the table, picked up my clutch from beside my chair, and told the room the bar was still open and dessert would still be served because everyone had already paid, in effect, for their meal by showing up, and I wasn't about to waste a perfectly good cake on Mark's mistakes. There's a moment from that Saturday night I haven't told you yet, one that happened after most of the guests had already quietly filtered out to their cars, whispering to each other in the parking lot in that specific hushed tone people use when they've just watched something they know they'll be retelling for years. My mother stayed behind, along with my 2 closest friends from college, the 3 of them helping the venue staff clear glasses off tables. Neither of them had been asked to touch, just needing something to do with their hands while they processed what they'd watched unfold. My mother found me in the small side room where the caterers had been prepping desserts, sitting on an overturned crate, still in my dress, staring at nothing in particular. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down on the crate next to mine, took my hand, and held it the way she used to when I was small, and had scraped a knee badly enough that talking about it would have made it worse before it made it better. Eventually, she asked me, quietly, how long I'd known before the party. I told her 2 days. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she told me something I didn't expect. She said she'd noticed something off about Mark almost a year earlier, a distance in how he talked about Danielle that felt just slightly too careful, too rehearsed, but she'd told herself she was imagining it, that a mother's instinct about her daughter's husband wasn't the same as proof, and she hadn't wanted to plant a seed of doubt in my marriage over a feeling she couldn't fully justify. She apologized for that, for staying quiet when some part of her had wondered. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for a feeling she couldn't prove. I meant it. But I also understood, sitting there in that small room surrounded by half-eaten anniversary cake, why Priya's folder had mattered so much more than my mother's instinct ever could have. Feelings get dismissed. Screenshots don't. I filed for divorce the following Monday morning, first thing, before I'd even fully processed the weekend. My sister's advice turned out to be exactly right, and the documented timeline Priya had built, screenshots, dates, that printed hotel confirmation, made the settlement conversation move considerably faster than Mark's lawyer clearly expected, judging by how quickly his initial aggressive posturing softened once our attorney laid out what we had. I don't know exactly what happened to Danielle's marriage afterward, since I understand her divorce hadn't been quite as final as she'd told everyone at every dinner where I'd sincerely asked how she was holding up. That part, I genuinely don't know, and honestly, at this point, it's not mine to know anymore. I've let that particular thread go. Priya and I still talk sometimes, coffee every few months, the strange kind of bond you build with someone who handed you the truth at real personal risk to themselves. I told her early on, and I've told her since, that she never has to apologize for waiting those months to tell me. I understand why she did. It's not an easy thing, holding someone else's truth in a folder, deciding when they're finally ready to see it, weighing the damage of telling against the damage of staying silent. Sometimes people ask me if I regret making it so public, if I should have handled it privately, quietly, with more dignity, pulled Mark aside instead of using a projector screen in front of 40 guests. And I think about that toast he gave, or almost gave, about loyalty, about how lucky he was that I stood by him through everything. I think about how deliberately he chose to lie to a room full of people who loved us both, people who'd bought gifts, who'd taken time out of their weekend to celebrate something he already knew was hollow. So no, I don't think I owed him a private ending to a very public lie. Tell me, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have waited, pulled him aside quietly instead? If you believe in silent, savage justice, hit subscribe. We post new stories all the time, and this one has a part 2 coming, because Danielle's side of this story, once it fully unraveled, turned out to be even messier than mine.